Today we're going to be going over whole house surge protection, and we're going to be installing this surge protector by ABB, who is also the sponsor of today's video, in this panel right behind me. This is a type 1 SPD, and I'll actually talk through the other types of surge protectors a little bit later in this video. This is primarily designed to be installed directly in your main panel where your service is on your property. This surge protection device meets the requirements of the 2020 National Electrical Code for providing surge protection at every dwelling. This THome Surge unit will provide 36 kA of protection, or kiloamps of protection, to your premises. Let's go ahead and get started installing this into this panel. One of the cool things about surge protection is that you can actually add as many layers of protection to your panel or your household or your electrical setup as you want to. So this particular unit is going to be going in this panel, which is technically dedicated to the heating equipment in this particular building. Now, the installation requirements say that we need to be installing this device on a 2-pole 20 amp breaker. And you can see we've got one of those right here in the top right hand corner of this panel, which is absolutely perfect. We should be able to attach our surge protective device to this breaker, even though it's still in use, and we're going to talk more about that in just a little bit. But this is a really good setup. You want to have your surge protective device as close to your main breaker as possible, and so this is going to be perfect for that particular application. If you don't have the option of locating it at the top, you can put it further down. It's just the closer to the top, the better. Every little bit of space between where your surge protective device is and the circuits downstream, it's going to cause it to be less effective against mitigating those surges. Before you take the cover off of your panel, disconnect the power if at all possible. At this location, I actually have a main disconnect outside that we were able to turn off, so there is no power at this panel whatsoever. Even though I know that is the case, I am still going to take precautions and work as if everything were energized. Because if you just treat it like it's live and you're always just really careful, you're gonna be a lot less likely to get shocked in the long run. Always hold the panel while you're removing the screws, otherwise it has a tendency to fall down and chop your toes off. Alright, here we are in the panel. You can see we've got our 20 amp breaker. This is feeding our well. It's always a good idea, even if you think something is off, to go ahead and test and verify that it is actually off. So we're going to do that with this non-contact voltage tester, and we are not getting any indicators that we have any power on here, so we are good to go with that. Now, taking a look at our actual surge protective device here, you can see we've got a spot right here so we can use our smallest size knockout. It's a 7/8 opening that it's going to be going through. Oftentimes people refer to this size as like a 1/2 inch knockout size because the size of PVC or fittings that would go into that are 1/2 inch fittings, but the actual hole size is bigger than that. This particular SPD is designed to be mounted externally to the panel. So you can see right here, it's got a spot where we can take this lock nut off and slide this through a standard knockout into the panel. And we're going to install this such that these wires are going to be as short as possible to their destination. We have 3 conductors, 2 hots, and a neutral wire. So right here you can see we've got the perfect setup. If this goes right here, we're going to have a nice short distance from where it comes into the panel to this breaker. The 2 hot legs and then the neutral will be able to land on the neutral bus right back in there. Even though I know this panel isn't live, I'm still going to go ahead and put my safety glasses on and my gloves. These aren't particularly rated for electric work, but they are better than nothing, and they actually do provide a barrier if you were to come in contact with some live terminals. In a lot of instances, you may or may not be able to disconnect the power coming to your main panel, so just wearing safety protection is always the best plan. A lot of times the wires feeding into the top of your panel are coming directly from the meter, and if that's the case, these lugs at the top are always going to be live, but you would go ahead and turn off your main breaker so that it at least de-energizes everything downstream of that. But working in a live panel is never a good plan. I don't recommend it, but a lot of times it is necessary. There's kind of unavoidable unless you want to have the utility come and disconnect the meter. Here's a quick look at the manufacturer's instructions for the device that we're installing today. So feel free to pause the video and look at these pages if you want to read directly from the manual, but this is the information that we're going to be following. No matter what device you're installing, make sure you take the time to go through and read the instructions. There's a lot of very valuable information in there. If you need any additional clarification, never hesitate to contact the manufacturer. A lot of the times they have a lot of extremely valuable information that they can provide to you. We're going to go ahead and choose this knockout right here to remove so that we can install our surge protection device, because it's kind of in between where our breaker is and where our neutral is going to land. And that's actually something to point out as well, is this needs to land on a neutral bar. It cannot land on a grounding bar. When you are suppressing surges, you want to take that excessive voltage and shunt it back to the neutral, which is going to get it back to the source as quickly as possible. So you don't want to connect it to the ground bar, you want to connect it to the neutrals. In this particular panel, the neutrals and grounds are all tied together. It just so happens that on this particular side of the panel right here, we don't have any other neutrals landing. The bonding screw is installed right up here, so this is all set up as a main panel and not as a sub panel. All right, we're just going to go ahead and tap that knockout loose here. It's usually pretty easy to get that to come out. We'll take our leads, extend those out. You can see they give you a pretty decent chunk of wire pre-attached. But again, you want these to be as short as possible with as few bends as possible. I'll actually overlay on the screen here the recommendations that they have for how best to install this in your panel as far as the way you route your wires. But this is definitely going to be the best case scenario that the way we're doing this right now. All right, let's pull these through. And we'll slide our lock nut down and onto the device. The nice thing about these externally mounted surge protectors is that they can be installed in any manufacturer's panel. You can actually get a breaker style or an internal style surge protective device for General Electric or ABB panels, as well as for Square D QO, which I've got one of those right here. The ABB version of this is the THQL Surge, so that link will be in the description as well. So all we would do to install this one is run our neutral up to our neutral bus right there, again as short as possible, and just snap this into position, just like that, and that would provide additional protection. So we could actually leave this surge protector and this surge protector in this same panel, and it's perfectly acceptable. Redundant protection is absolutely fine when it comes to surge protectors. I would actually move this one up to these top two spots if I were going to leave this one in here. I'm just showing it as an example though at the moment. Since we're talking about it, let's talk about the 4 different classes of surge protection. We'll start by talking about this device. This is technically a type 1 surge protector, meaning that it can be installed on the line side of your electrical system or the load side of your electrical system. Up here would be the line side, and down here would be the load side. So if we had a way to properly land these, it would actually be approved to land this up on the neutral, and then our 2 hot legs on either of our 2 hot legs up here, and that would be an acceptable installation according to the manufacturer. Now if you were going to do that, the main issues are that you typically don't have a spot to attach those that is rated for that size of conductor. You can't just loosen these lugs and stick them in there. It's not really an approved way of doing it. So that's the first reason why it's not very common to do it that way. The second reason is that it's just not as common to do it that way, so inspectors may or may not allow you to install it on the line side. So if you do want to land it on the line side of your system, you're going to have to contact the electrical inspector or the authority having jurisdiction and make sure that you do it in a way that is approved by them. For all those reasons, it's best to just go with the standard installation of running your 2 hot legs to each leg of a 20 amp breaker like we're going to be doing in this particular situation, and landing your neutral wire on the neutral bus. So the most standard installation method for this particular device is in a type 2 application, even though it is technically a type 1 surge protection device that is rated to be on the utility side. So that covers type 1 and the application of using it as type 2. And that brings us to now talking about type 2 surge protectors. This is specifically a type 2 surge protector because it's on the load side of your electrical service. This has no way of being installed on the utility side since it snaps in one of the breaker spots, which is on the load side of the service. In this application, these would be functioning exactly the same though. Type 3 surge protectors are just these guys, these point of use surge protectors. protectors, where you plug it in to protect a particular device in a particular area of your home. Not every power strip is a surge protector, so this one I was actually looking at for a little bit before I saw the specific information that says that it is a surge protector. You can see right there, suppressed voltage rating, 400 volts, line to neutral, line to ground, or neutral to ground. So if it suppresses that 400 volts, my understanding is it will begin shunting electricity back to the source. So kind of interesting how that works. After I looked at that other one, I decided to look at this surge protector, and the interesting thing is that voltage is different. It says our VPR is 700 volts, so I guess it doesn't start protecting until it reaches 700. I'm not really sure. Comment down below if you understand how this works exactly, but you can see right there it does say Type 3 SPD or Surge Protective Device. Type 4 surge protective devices are ones that are actually integrated by the manufacturer themselves into the end-use product. So if there were to be, let's say, a piece of really expensive networking equipment where you have hard drives and stuff in it, the manufacturer could choose to implement a Type 4 surge protective device that would be internally protecting that piece of equipment. But that's something that obviously you would never be able to install or really encounter. You're just gonna hook up whatever equipment it is, and if it has a Type 4 surge protector, great. If not, nothing you can really do about it, but you could add a Type 3. So as you can see, it's kind of a layered process of surge protection. You have potentially a Type 1 surge protector that could be on the utility side of your electrical system. You could have a Type 2 surge protector like this one right here in your panel. And then you have your Type 3 surge protector for equipment that is connected to it. And then Type 4 if it happens to be integrated in the actual devices by the manufacturer. All right, let's get back to installing this thing. As I mentioned earlier, in order to get the best possible surge protection, we want these leads to be as short as possible. So we'll go ahead and get these trimmed to that exact best case scenario length. You want to avoid extending these wires or splicing these wires. They just need to be as short and straight as possible. Any unnecessary bends that you put in them give the potentially high voltage surges a chance to basically deviate from where you're trying to shunt the electricity. So go ahead and take and strip these back about 1/2 inch. These are actually only 14 gauge wires because it doesn't actually take a huge wire size for these surge protection devices to work. It's a surge is something that is a very short lasted event. It just has to carry it for the length of time that the surge is occurring. The insulation on these wires, I'm noticing, seems to be thicker than the average insulation on a typical THHN conductor. We'll go ahead and connect our neutral. Some manufacturers of these surge protection devices have a ground wire included. And it's kind of interesting because you don't need a ground wire whatsoever for a surge protection device to work properly. It just needs to get back to the source, and the more direct path to the source is the neutral. The grounding system isn't really involved in the surge protection aspect of what is going on. But some manufacturers have chosen to include a ground wire because it kind of gives them a leg up in saying, oh, well, our surge protector has a ground wire, and so therefore it is better, but actually it really is completely irrelevant. So the fact that this one is just 3 wires instead of having a ground wire doesn't matter at all. Comment down below if the surge protectors that you have used in the past have had ground wires or not. I also want to make sure that we get this lock nut good and snug here. One other cool thing about the THome Surge device is that this is rated to be installed outdoors. So if you have an outside panel, you can go ahead and mount this to a knockout. More likely it's going to be on the bottom of the panel and not on the side, since weatherproof enclosures typically have all their knockouts in the bottom. But this thing is perfectly acceptable to be mounted outside underneath your panel. ABB also has a trim kit so that you can install this in a flush mount application. So I will link to that information in the description of this video as well. We are now ready to make our connections to our breaker, but I wanted to point something out here really quick. I'm going to redesignate this one right here. You can see we have a white wire that is being used as a hot wire, but it was never redesignated as such. So this needs to have black tape wrapped around it to designate that this is indeed a hot wire. It's pretty common to see this in older panels. They just hooked it up, and obviously anyone who's looking at this is going to be like, oh yeah, that's not a neutral, that's a hot wire because they're using it like that. But this is supposed to be designated with black or red tape depending on which phase it's on. In this case, nothing is separated by phasing anyway, so we'll probably just put a little bit of black tape around there. Now, like I said earlier, the best case scenario is going to be to land these two wires onto a dedicated 20 amp breaker for the surge protector. But technically it is permissible to land it onto an existing 20 amp 2-pole breaker so long as the breaker is rated for it and it is approved by the inspector in your area. Right here is an example of a 2-pole breaker by ABB, so if you were installing this device in a load center that was actually the same manufacturer, this would be what the breaker would look like that you would be connecting it to instead of the squared E ones that we're using in this case. But their breakers are rated to have 2 conductors land on each one of the connections on their breakers. And on QO breakers, it's exactly the same. So let's just pop this breaker out and I'll show you the designations on the side of it. Right here you can see we've got both 1 and 2 conductors pictured being clamped into this terminal. With 1 conductor you can see it's 14 to 6 gauge aluminum or copper. With 2 wires you can see it's 14 to 10 gauge copper only. So if you had 1 aluminum conductor landing there, we would not be able to connect that second conductor. But you can see since we're in that range of 14 to 10 gauge, we are totally good to go to land our additional conductor for our surge protector on this breaker. Right down there on the bottom, it also says our torque setting, which is going to be that 36 inch-pounds. So we'll go ahead and loosen that bottom one, get our L2 leg slid in. Right there, making sure not to pinch any insulation underneath the terminal when we tighten it down. We'll tighten it to exactly 36 inch-pounds. I might actually come back by here with my torque screwdriver. I don't have it in my tool bag right now. And I'm going to grab some black tape really quick so that we can tape that wire while it's loose, because it's a lot easier to tape them when they are not connected. Whoever tightened that screw in there did a good job. This breaker is actually old enough that it's still just a flathead connection instead of having the actual modern style. So we're just going to take and tape this wire so that it has been redesignated. White is reserved specifically for the neutral, so if you're ever using a white wire for something else, it has to be redesignated. And now we can go ahead and add our L1 side here. And strip just a tiny bit more insulation. 36 inch-pounds. Right about there. All right, let's get this thing snapped back in there. Hopefully our wires weren't too short. There we go. All right, we'll push the well pump wires a little bit further back, and then we'll straighten these ones out. That's looking pretty good right there. If you guys have any interesting stories about lightning wiping out a bunch of your equipment, comment down below. I'd love to hear those things. And then also tell me, what is your surge protection strategy and what have you deployed on your particular property to prevent surges? My light died, so this is proof that the power is actually off. According to the instructions, we have installed this particular device in the optimal location. You can see we've got it connected as short as possible to our neutral and our 2 hot conductors going to our double pole breaker. And that's exactly the scenario that we have created right here. Installing it in that position is especially beneficial with an older style panel like this one, where the neutral bars don't extend all the way down, because we're able to get that thing right up next to where the neutrals go. Otherwise, if we had put this thing anywhere down lower here, our neutral wire would have had to extend up and over, and that neutral wire is what is taking all of that excess voltage or those surges and sending them back to the source or the neutral. So keeping that wire as short as possible is really important. I might actually install one of these devices out at the main panel out in my yard, which is interesting because it is an outdoor enclosure, so all of my knockouts are in the bottom of the panel. So that is going to require that I run those wires a little bit further, but having it installed, even if the wires are a little bit longer, is way better than not having the protection at all. So if you don't have a whole house surge protector installed yet, I would highly recommend picking one up. They're actually pretty reasonably priced. Like I said, I'll link to this exact one in the description. I'll also try to link to some of the Type 2 surge protectors that snap right into the breaker spots that are in your panel, both for the square D panels as well as the General Electric or ABB panels and some of the others as well. So I'll link to those in the description. The downside to these is that the rating or the amount of power that they are able to clamp is not as good as it is on some of these dedicated devices that mount outside of the panel. On this Square D QO surge breaker, you can see the exact specifications. For the maximum surge current are 27,000 amps or 27 kA. And then you can see the clamping voltage as well. That's 500 volts at which this thing would begin to clamp that additional voltage back to the source. Our SCCR is 22,000 amps. The THome Surge that we just finished installing is a 36 kA or 36 kiloamps or 36,000 amps. This one right here is a 27,000 amp unit, so it's a little bit smaller for this one that actually snaps directly into the panel. You can get bigger or smaller surge protection devices. The main thing is just having one. Start by having one and then add several layers of protection throughout your premises so that you don't end up having to deal with a bunch of fried equipment. I was just asking Ruben if he wants to get one of these installed at his place, and he's like, actually, you know, I probably should, because I guess at his father-in-law's place, they recently had a surge and it fried every single one of his various electrical charging devices that he had out in his shop. So battery chargers of various kinds, they all got taken out. And a simple device like this that you're going to have less than $100 into has the potential to save thousands and thousands of dollars worth of equipment. As far as the best location to install your surge protector in, that is going to be the first disconnecting means at your premises. Your surge protector doesn't protect from direct lightning strikes on your actual physical property. It protects from surges coming from the utility side, from lightning strikes that might be fairly remote to your location. There are other things that can cause surges that we're not going to get into right now, but basically you want to keep those surges suppressed at your location. The surges that are coming from the utility you want to reduce so that it doesn't fry everything on your property. Knowing that those surges are coming from the utility side, you want to have your first surge protective device as close to where your power comes in as possible. So your main panel, like right here, is going to be your best bet for installing your first surge protective device. Here's where the power comes into this particular property, and you can see we've got a main disconnect switch right over here. So this actually has the ability to flip it down into auxiliary power so we can use the generator, or back up to connect to the grid. If you have a property out in the country, this is a pretty common setup to have a main distribution point. If you have a property out in the country, this is pretty common to have a main distribution point where then we have main sets of wires that are feeding the various buildings. The house over there, the shop way over there, that building over there. So each one of those locations would benefit from having their own dedicated surge protective device. Theoretically, we could add a surge protective device to this particular location right here and have it kind of mounted here on the bottom somewhere. I'm pretty sure that most electrical inspectors wouldn't have any issue with having a surge protective device out there, but comment down below, would you install one out on the pole there, or do you think it's fine just to have them in each building that has a main panel in it? Since this electrical system is somewhat older, all of the panels that are fed from that location only have 3 conductors, 2 hots and a neutral. So the neutrals and grounds aren't separated at the first means of disconnect like it's supposed to be if you were to install a new system today. Once the power comes into the main panel at each building, From there downstream, everything is separated with the grounds and the neutrals. So if you had an additional sub panel in this house right here, you would then separate the neutrals and grounds. But where it first comes in here, they are all tied together because there's no way to separate them because there isn't a physical ground wire going back to the source out there in the yard. Technically, a surge protector anywhere on the property will help, even upstream, as long as it's on the same electrical system, but having it at the point where the surge is going to be coming in is going to be your best bet for protecting everything downstream of that. If you have multiple electrical panels on your property, say in like separate buildings or just sub panels, my recommendation is to put one of these in each one of those panels for the best possible protection. We are ready. We're going to throw this panel cover back on, and then I'll come back and show you guys the indicator light over here on the actual device. The main power is on. Now we're going to go ahead and just flip our main breaker right here. And then we'll flip on the breaker that powers the well and the THome Surge. And we should see the light come on almost immediately. There we go. As far as maintenance goes, these things are very straightforward. You can see right there it says green is protected, no light means replace the unit. If you have a significant surge, this device is basically going to sacrifice itself in order to protect the rest of the electronics. So that's what that indicator light basically means. If it's off, it means it probably protected the equipment in the system, and you should go ahead and replace it. Now we're going to simulate a surge. Just kidding. If you guys want to keep learning with me, I'm going to put a couple videos here on the screen that are relevant to this particular topic. Thank you so much for watching. Once again, I want to thank ABB for sponsoring this video. I had some really technical questions for those guys, so I called them and we just visited about surge protection for a while, and it was super interesting. So hopefully we'll be working with those guys again very soon in the future.